Okay. Hello there. Welcome to the My Job Workshop for the Northwest District. And I'm Blake Bradford, your district superintendent. And tonight we're going to be talking about the church council, the board of trustees, and the finance committee. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And you'll see a slide up here, and you should see my slide and myself, I believe. Yeah, that should be how it probably works. And so a couple things before we get started. I'll have open prayer in a second, but a couple things I wanted y'all to know. One, for all the committees, or for each of the committees, I'm going to be let me get everybody admitted in here. I'm going to be having a slide available. So I have like a church council. Here's a slide package. Trustees, here's your slide package. Finance committee, here's your slide package. And that way it's designed so that perhaps you're the chair or a representative committee, if you want, or a pastor, you want to talk to and show your church, hey, here's the tools we have, that sort of thing. You can just use this in your local church. You can take it and add to it or customize it or whatever you want to do. They're PDFs, so you can just do whatever you want to with these slide sets and use them in your local setting. And that's why I designed them that way, to be just easily accessible for y'all to utilize. There is actually more information in the slides than there is in the, one second, there we go. There we go. There's actually more information in the slides than there will be shown. And that's because I was trying to cover a lot of discipline stuff. So some of the like fine print in the discipline, so it's in the slide. And also as you're watching me go through, you'll see I'm not reading every word of that. I mean, I'll just say that's in the discipline and it'll be printed there, but it's in the discipline. So some of it's just for you to know where to find stuff. It's easier just to know, oh, that's in there somewhere. Okay, just so you can find the passage later. So all that's available. You don't have to worry about taking notes. And we're going to have some Q&A along the way, which I hope is fruitful. And I just muted everybody, so you can just unmute yourself. If you're using like an iPad, it's probably your upper right hand. If you're using a computer, it's probably your lower left hand is the mute button. So let's go ahead and jump in. First of all, I want to begin with the word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for these leaders. Thank you for their faithfulness in their ministry. Thank you, oh Lord, for their service to your church. Lord, bless them as they start this new year of servant leadership. And Lord, guide them as they lead their church and guide their church into ministry, into your neighborhoods, into your communities, oh God. Lord, be with us all this evening as we learn and are equipped together. This we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. So I want to start off by just framing something biblically. I have a picture here. It's an icon, a painting from Acts chapter 6. It's the bringing in of the deacons of the church. And if you remember Acts chapter 6, there's becomes a bit of a controversy in the early church. The widows are not of the Greek-speaking widows are not being taken care of in the daily distribution of food. In other words, what we have here is a ministry deployment problem and a resource problem that because of the organization of the church, that resources were not being deployed well and people weren't receiving ministry, and there were some complaints. Hey, apostles, knocking on the apostles, hey, we got a problem here. Things aren't happening as they're supposed to. And the apostles had a big choice ahead of them. And they could have said, we're supposed to be in charge of the church. We got to run everything. We're going to run it all. And that's that. And if you're upset, that's too bad. And they could have just hoarded ministry. But that's, of course, not what they did. What they said was, we have our job, which is this, to share the word and to guide the church into the future, into God's world. But if we get stuck on other things that could be other people's jobs, we're not only making it harder for ministry to happen, we're also stealing ministry from these other people that God's gifted to do ministry. So they said, hey, pick 7 folks, and that was that first group of deacons. and here have St. Stephen, here's the one kneeling there. Pick folks, and they blessed them. They laid hands, they blessed them. Everyone cheered. Everyone was really excited. Everyone trusted these other leaders. And in Acts chapter 6, it says, after that happened, the church grew. It's like the lid was taken off. And that's the image I want us to have when we talk about ministry and servant leadership in ministry. It's not about hoarding leadership. It's not about, oh, I can do this and you can't. It's about saying, okay, right now, there's some of you have been elected. You've been chosen by your churches to have certain roles in the life of the church, of certain roles in leadership, and you stay in your lane, and that helps other people do their lane in ministry, their giftedness in ministry. And so you can encourage more ministry to happen. And so that's what we're going to be kind of talking about tonight. And that's based on the structure. Now, I want to jump right in. Again, the basic committee structure of United Methodist Church. We have the annual conference, and the charge conference is the entity that relates directly with the annual conference. That's the group. If you remember, like votes on compensation, you do the annual reports from the trustees and the finance committee and membership, and you do elections of officers, and you also elect lay members that go to annual conference. That's all happens at the charge conference level. Of course, your charge conference is not going to be meeting every month. At least I hope not, right? You have to have a DS or another elder preside. You have to have a letter. It's a whole official circumstance for this official church meeting that has certain jobs it has in the Book of Discipline. But that's not the way things work, because that's not very practical, right? And a lot of things the church doesn't need a charge conference. You just need your leadership board. So what we have is the church council is the administrative board. It's the board. It is the we're going to talk more about this one and divide it out, but it is the executive committee of the charge conference. And then you have different other committees that relate to it: the staff parish or pastor parish relations committee, your board of trustees, your finance, and different ministry teams relate to it. Of course, the pastor's in there too. The pastor is interesting because they're a member of the annual conference, but they're appointed and deployed, sent into a local church. And so they have a relationship with the local church, but they're not a member of the local church. And that's part of our historic polity. You also see there you have nominations and lay leadership. Job of that, of course, chaired by the pastor, is to find leaders and equip and recruit folks into these different ministry jobs. So just right off the bat, that's our structure. Now, sometimes that gets out of whack because, one group says, oh, the trustees, I'm board of directors. The church council should report to us. No, that's not how it works. And sometimes there's a situation where you have a couple of different committees at odds with each other. Like, well, what's the pastoral salary we can afford? And the staff parish is recommending one thing, the finance says nothing. Well, that has to be worked out at the church council level before you can take it to the church conference. It has to be deconflicted. So there's some pieces there. I'm gonna see if I can move my chat window. And if you have questions along the way, feel free to add them. I'll do my best, but I'm not the best always at seeing them. So I'll be looking at certain times. I'll be looking at Q&A. But if you have a question, feel free to put it on. Oh, it's great. Love seeing where everyone is from. That's great. Thank you. So right off the bat, we're going to talk about governance. Governance in a local church is an act of stewardship. I know we think stewardship is that, money you put in an envelope or stewardship campaigns, but what I'm really talking about is being a steward of God's resources. Your bank account is God's bank account. Your facilities are God's. If you have a church van, that's God's van for God's ministry. And so you all are leaders that are stewarding the policies, the resources, the people. You are legal fiduciaries as a nonprofit entity in the state of Arkansas. All these are the acts of governance. Managing these policies, resources, facilities, fiduciary work, managing personnel, overseeing and holding accountable the different ministries. This is all the work of being good stewards of God's resources. I want to begin with the church council. The church council are really the ones in the best position, along with the pastor, to hold ministry teams and committees accountable, to be doing the job. And so I think of this idea of accountable leadership is to be held to account, which is a very Christian and certainly very Wesleyan thing to do. Because ministry committees aren't about just keeping themselves around. They're about doing ministry, about making a transformation, about sharing Christ in our communities. The church council, the image I've used lately is like the church council is a traffic light. You have different other committees, you have different ministry teams, you have the pastor looking at different things they're wanting to do in ministry. The church council is that traffic light saying, oh, red light, green light, who goes first so you don't ram into each other. And it coordinates that work. It manages different recommendations. It sets priorities. And that traffic light role it might be a helpful way to imagine if you sit on church council, because you're going to not be producing all the work yourself. You're going to have all these different committees doing things, but you need to make sure things go in the right order and they are on the right priorities. I have some text here of examples of that. One is, setting the strategic direction of the church, overseeing that governance, looking at, what's our mission, what's our plans, how do we manage and check in on progress. If someone says they're going to do something, how is the church council able to follow up with them and say, okay, are these things actually being accomplished? There's a whole bunch of other responsibilities in the discipline too, like reviewing the membership of the church, filling vacancies. Every officer except lay members to annual conference can be filled. If you have an empty slot, someone passes away, moves out of state, something like that, those interim vacancies can be covered by the church council. Church council establishes the budget. You have a recommendation from the finance committee, and then they're responsible to say, yep, here's the budget, and do any edits or whatever, and recommend that. And also recommend different things to the charge conference, like pastor compensation and such. There's a small print here, and this is one of the reasons I said I'm going to have all of this online, downloadable. And by the way, while I'm talking about it, I'm going to put it in the chat right now. This is, there we are. That is the, nope, I didn't get it all. I'm sorry. This is me trying to do it too fast. There it is. Try the second link I just put in the chat. The first one will get you to the wrong place. This slide you'll see if you download it, because I know it's like tiny, tiny print. This is a basic membership chart. Now, you can work with your superintendent, i.e. me, and edit that a little bit. You can have small churches edited a lot, just based upon what you got going. You can frame this the way you need to. But the basics of it is you're going to have chairpersons and or representatives of the different administrative committees, your lay member annual conference. If you have United Women of Faith or Methodist Men, you could have them on there, maybe a youth person or young adult pastor. You could also have some at-large people. Sometimes there's like, 3 at-large folks. Different churches that do it different ways. But this is really designed to be flexible. It's not, how do you try to have the right numbers to fit into the list on the discipline? The discipline literally says you can adapt as needed for your circumstance. In other words, figure out what you need to do your ministry and then build the structure to do that. It's not about the other way around. Now, some of the committees are a lot stricter than this one. There's a lot less flexibility. This one's really flexible. So you can be creative with it and build the team you need to do the job God needs you to do. Let's see here. Okay. Oh. Now, I've got some tools in the next couple of slides about healthy board meetings. And I wanted to show you these examples. Some of them are some books I've written. They're in there. but I wanted to give you the basics of some ideas that you may want to think about. And again, all this stuff is downloadable. First is guiding principles. I do suggest that your church council not deal with every issue one by one by one by one. I mean, that's how you get like 3-hour meetings. My suggestion is you govern by policy and guiding principles. You set some basic standards. For instance, purchasing limits. Okay, the church admin can spend up to this amount without approval. That's just in their budget. If they want to spend this amount, they need to get the pastor's approval. They need to spend this amount, they need to get the finance chair's approval. You set some approval standards, like from this dollar to this dollar, and set some different standards. And then you say, go do it. You don't have to wait. Oh, the admin needs to buy another box of paper. Well, I'll send in my submission and see if it gets approved. Now, do pre-approvals at certain limits for certain things. Who can sign service contracts? If you happen to have credit card, what are the policies? How if outside third parties would like to use the fellowship hall for a community event, just set this up by guidelines. And then you as a church council, you deal with the exceptions or the weird stuff, and let the giveaway permission giving style, if it fits within these guidelines, whoever this person can approve it, the admin can approve it, the pastor can approve it. But leading by these guidelines means that when it comes time to the actual meeting, you can focus on really more important stuff that's either unique or more strategic. So the image I use of these guidelines, now you see I have this playing field here with the grass. You have the discipline, you see that fence around the edge? That's the book of discipline and the laws of the state of Arkansas for nonprofits. You need, don't be trying to play ball outside the fence. And then within the fence, you have some lines. Those could be different policies that you have. And then you see you have these lines on the inside of the court. That's, where how you can play certain ways. Well, that's stuff that these guiding principles that your church council can change as needed month per month based upon new information. And that's just so everyone can play the game safely and have fun. And you draw the lines out and then let the game be played instead of having to take every single issue and deal with it as something new. One of the suggestions I have for your council and really any of your meetings is not to wait till the day of the meeting and then have the pieces of paper stuck over in the corner, the stacks. Here's all the budgets, here's this. And everyone shows up for their meeting. You show up, it's a 6:30 meeting, you show up and you go, oh, and you grab your pieces of paper. My suggestion is have a packet that you're going to do every month for your meeting, for your council meeting. Include some vital signs, financial information, goal progress, any reports from committees. Just do it in a nice packet. You can put it online, you can hand it out the Sunday before, whatever. And that gives everyone at least a few days, maybe a week before the meeting to read everything. And then when you come to meeting, you don't have to go backwards and what's in here and fumble through papers. You're ready to vote on stuff or talk about stuff. And everyone's read it, everyone's on the same page, everyone can then move on and do their work. And so that packet, if you include some action items like that, it'll make life a lot easier. I do have a lot more information about that in those two books, but you'll see again, if you want just a copy of the examples, there you go. And then I also have a template agenda for a meeting. Opening prayer, do some leadership development and spiritual formation, do all your consent calendar work, like go ahead and have your minutes from your last meeting and anything that just needs to be approved and say, oh, do you approve the consent calendar? Yes. And you move on. You don't have to read every word of the minutes. You don't have to read out loud all the reports. You just accept it all. And if something needs to be pulled out, you say, anything need to be pulled out of the consent calendar? Yes. Okay, pull out that one report and you deal with it. If not, you just approve the whole thing. I've seen that right there save 30 minutes in a meeting. No, just with that one action. And then you do some fiduciary work like trustees and finance stuff. do some missional accountability work. That's like, how are we on our evangelism? Who's coming for second visits? Asking how did the Advent services go? What happened? How is attendance over through Advent? What's our Lent plans? Are we getting ready for Easter? You just whatever mission accountability there is. Hey, we're going to do a service project once a month. How the planning on that going? Then do any kind of planning work. You can go into executive session if the staff parish committee needs you to go into executive session for some confidential work. You can excuse anybody that's not a member of the board, and the staff parish can share what they need to share. Again, maintain as much confidentiality as possible. And if you notice here, I suggest that every meeting conclude with some communications work. In other words, after you have at the end of your meeting, what do we need to share about this? And have examples about that, concluding every meeting with this communication. The idea being you want to build some transparency, some health, some accountability in the larger congregation. So you can say, okay, well, we voted on this, this, and this, and out of that, you may say, okay, how about if Tommy can then do a report in the church newsletter about it, or hey, Jim needs to do an announcement about that on Sunday, that item. However you need to talk about it. That way that whatever you accomplish in your meeting, you're sharing it to the larger congregation. I'm going to pause here for some Q&A. Please unmute if you have any questions. And after we do this section, I'm going on to trustees next. So any questions? I'm looking in the chat. Is there any questions from the room? And I can't see you raise your hand. You'll just have to unmute and start talking. Does this matching how you think of your church council? I see a few head nods. Okay. Okay. Well, I do hope that you'll take advantage of some of those ideas like the packet and the template agenda, and use that same agenda every month. It might make work a little bit easier. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. I've never seen a church council function this way. Yeah, well, I get you. Well, that's because nothing always works out exactly as planned, right? You're dealing with real life and real ministry, and sometimes that means you have to adjust. But I will say this: if you can set up some basic structures, that means when tough stuff happens, you're more prepared for it. I've seen churches that when COVID hit, some of them were better prepared with their systems. Some were scrambling to come up with a whole process to deal with issues. Other churches had a process to deal with issues, just this happened to be the biggest issue they ever had dealt with. I saw the ones that had already set the process to deal with stuff. Man, it made it a lot easier for them when stuff came their way they weren't expecting. Okay, I'm going to move on to trustees, and then we'll take another break after that for more questions. So, Board of Trustees, y'all may not know this, but unless you have an endowment committee, they're in charge of endowments. Did y'all know that? Also, vans, equipment, bank accounts, all that stuff is Board of Trustees work. Board of Trustees are institutional fiduciaries. Their members of these committees need to focus, therefore, on stewardship and the mission of the church. The example I say is, at one of my churches, we had a church parlor that I tell you, I don't think had been changed since the Nixon administration. In fact, I still remember a mother of the bride coming, and we were setting up, and the mother of the bride said, "I think those flowers are in my bridal pictures." Talking about some fake flowers on that corner. We are pretty good at that, friends, making sure nothing changes. What I'll say for the Board of Trustees, that's actually not your job to make sure nothing ever changes with your facility. It's to make sure your facility is in the shape it needs to be used for God's people, for God's ministry. I hope that some of your stuff wears out. And you have to deal with that. That's a good problem to have. If stuff's getting worn out, that means stuff is being used for Jesus. And so I'm going to encourage you, trustees, to see how fast can we wear stuff out for Jesus and make that part of your job description. How does that sound? That sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? Um, so as the board of trustees, you're in charge of all this stuff. It is uh, this is found in the Book of Discipline, and it's you would think. Now here's where the board of trustees stuff gets complicated. You think, oh, it's over here in the 300s, right? It's not. The rest of the committees are in the 300s. I mean, the 200s. I apologize. The rest of the committees are in the 200s. But then when it gets trustees, it says turn to 25, 25. And you're flipping over into the back. That's because there is the property section in the back of the discipline. And so over here, it says, please refer to. So the Board of Trustees material is in the back of the discipline in the 2500s, and it has your job description stuff there. If you notice there, man, letters of articles incorporation, managing bequest, there is a lot of stuff that for some of us does not feel like trustee stuff, because a lot of us have taken trustee idea and we think, oh, that means like making sure the toilets work, making sure the light bulbs work. But it's a lot more complicated than that. There's a lot of, as you can tell, so-called briefcase work. I'll be talking about that more in a sec. They notice here as I'm looking at this, that first item, be responsible in conjunction with the pastor for the use of all church buildings and grounds. Maintaining insurance. I know that's been really tough lately. Insurance rates going up high. There's this last bullet point, operating as fiduciary officers of the charge conference and church council, upholding the trust laws and fulfill the fiduciary requirements of the Book of Discipline. I use that word a lot, fiduciary. There are legal expectations for you as trustees that if you fail, you open yourself up personally liable if you're ignoring your fiduciary responsibilities. This is real stuff here. It's not about making people happy all the time. And it means you have to say no sometimes because you have certain rules and expectations. Like you couldn't allow ministries to go on unsafely. That has a liability issue for the whole church. And so things like that. So you see some responsibilities there. There are some special membership requirements. It's 3 to 9 folks. At 1/3 lay women, 1/3 lay men are the minimums. They have to be over the age of 18, and that's because they have to be able to sign legal documents or accept legal documents. No pastor is a voting member unless elected as a member, and they're elected by the charge conference to serve a term, and they are renewable 3-year terms. So it's a little bit different, but there's a reference there on that membership. I have the toolbox and the briefcase there. Here's what I want to say about that. Depending on the size of your church, you may need to rethink how you use your board of trustees. I've had plenty of trustee meetings where we pause the meeting in the middle of it to go look at and fix the broken toilet. We'd all kind of crowd around the toilet and watch one of the trustees have his toolbox and like with a wrench trying to fix stuff. And while that's common, more common than one might think, that's actually not the job of the trustees. Your job is to ensure stuff works. It's not to go, especially break in the middle of the meeting, to go fix it. Think of like a college board of trustees. You don't see the college board of trustees pause in the middle of the meeting to go fix stuff. They're responsible for all this legal and property stuff. That doesn't mean they have to do it personally. And depending on the size and nature of the church, you may want to recruit or assign a staff person or a volunteer or maybe a volunteer team of a few handy folks and let them be a building maintenance ministry team. Or you may have a whole, larger churches have a staff that does it. You give them a clear mandate, you give them spending limits, you give them boundaries, like they can't remodel, they can fix stuff, up to standard. But you as trustees can assign those people, and that may help with your rotation. Because I've been in a church where we never let our trustee chair rotate off because he was so darn good at fixing stuff. Well, how about just let him be the head of the building maintenance team? It's a ministry team, just like your backpack food program ministry team. It's just another ministry team that they're good at toolbox stuff. And then you have your board of trustees that's in charge of the big picture. It's in charge of, like, well, what's the shape of our HVAC systems? Where do we find a good insurance policy? All that stuff. And then give spending limits to this building maintenance team, and he can come report, and the chair can come report to the trustees on a regular basis or whatever, but not get involved in all the fixing of everything, and just let the trustees do the work they're responsible for and give away that other work, and don't worry about rotation or any of that stuff. Just find people that love doing it. And so that's a big suggestion I have for you. It might help your church out. I know I've seen it in other churches work out real well. Um, and again, so this is some of the ideas behind that. I included another slide just so you can use it if you're trying to talk to your local church about that, the tool belts versus trustees, and how each of them have kind of different lanes they're operating in. And again, for a bigger church, you may have a staff that does this. In a smaller church, you'd have a volunteer team. Another thing the trustees need to think about is, you can tell it by the name, the trust clause. Charge conference paperwork requires annual certification. It's in all your deeds. And the book discipline now has a similar clause for any kind of incorporation articles that you have. They need to have that trust clause in them. That's just part of our polity since the 1700s. And it's important. You're responsible for safe gatherings, which is the Child Protection and Vulnerable Adult Protection Program. Doesn't mean you have to do it all. You just have to ensure it's in place and approve any rule changes there. I suggest the trustees have a facility policy. I was talking with Rodney Steele. He served Rogers first, and he told me the story back when he was at that church, that someone was they were at a wedding, and the mother of the bride, the father of the bride, had a drill and was about to drill into the communion rail when he went, whoa, 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 because they were going to hang stuff on it. Yeah, I know. I think I just saw some trustees here have faint right in the middle of the video when I said that. So I suggest, have a wedding policy. What can be done, what's not allowed. You can have a gift acceptance policy. Just because someone wants to give you something doesn't mean you have to receive it, friends. You're allowed to say no. And so you can set up a gift acceptance policy. You can say who's allowed to do repairs and who's not allowed to do repairs. You could have rules for, like the church china. Some churches have china. What is allowed to leave the building? I had a church that we allowed by our policy. We had a bunch of tables that if anybody, member of the church, wanted to check them out, we had a whole system in place. You could check out those tables, and people did. As long as we weren't using it for something else, they could check out these tables and chairs, and people did for reunions and all kinds of stuff, and that's fine. But we had the rules in place. And once the policy was in place, it made it a lot easier to say yes or no. And you didn't stick the pastor in a difficult position because the policy was written. And so that's one of the jobs of trustees, is set a policy for your stuff, how you manage your stuff. There are several books here. I've got this. You probably don't want to be buying these now because they'll come up with some new ones real soon. This was for the 2017 through 2020 season. And you see they have different little booklets for each of the committees. You don't want to be buying these. I bet you they'll come out sooner or later when the new discipline does after general conference. But it's a helpful tool. I've got some of these on PDF if you're really interested. That first one. Another one is a book called The Biopractice of Church Leadership, and it finds administration stuff there. That's just a great book. It's written by the treasurer the church treasurer in Missouri for that conference. There's also a book called Safe Sanctuaries. Of course, we're using Safe Gatherings here in the Arkansas Conference. So those are some resources. Our administrative services website has some documents too that may be helpful to you. including some stuff, I believe, about minimums for insurance coverage. And that's a change some to allow for like functional insurance and not full replacement. Some of our historic sanctuaries to do a full replacement is almost impossible. So some folks have decided to save a ton of money, the functional replacement. So there's stuff like that, and you can see that, and we can answer questions. So I'm gonna pause again. Do you have any comments? You can write them in on the chat, or you can just unmute and ask me. I covered that's usually an hour-long thing that you just got in like 15 minutes right there. Okay. Are you still with me? All righty. Any questions y'all wanted to ask? You feel free, Prince. Okay. I'm not seeing any on the chat. I will keep on going, and I don't think I'll get done quite before the ball game, but I'll keep us moving along. How about that? Um, the next piece is the finance committee. If you notice the thread here, I had the church council, trustees, and finance. That's because the church council is the overarching group, that traffic light. And a lot of things I would say for each committee, I kind of said there, like having the standard agenda and stuff like that. You can you adapt and tweak for your different committee. But trustees and finance they're responsible for the resources of the church. You're both stewarding God's resources. The financial resources are the property resources of the church. And so they should be working hand in hand. Some churches do regular dual joint meetings with trustees and finance. That makes a lot of sense. I've even known a few churches that decide to combine the two as just a resource committee that covers both. You can, but meeting together once in a while might be good, especially since you're both talking about endowment stuff and in stocks and things like that. And just how do you budget for things like, well, we know we're going to have 3 air conditioners go out in the next 5 years. How do we go ahead and start planning ahead for that? I know I probably just gave a few more trustees kind of freaked out. They were thinking about it. Yeah, I know those HVACs just do a sin, don't they? But kind of planning ahead and working with finance committee, for example, to create a rainy day fund and such. That's some good joint work you might want to do, maybe at least once or twice a year. The facilities, endowments, vans, equipment, that is all trustee work. The finance committee, again, the same thing though. They are fiduciaries. And one thing I need y'all to think about as finance committee is you're not just in charge of cutting the budget or making sure things fall under budget. Your job is to do budgeting, handling money, all that, but also to get the income. You're not just responsible for the expense side, you're also responsible for the income side, to have the conversations with the church about stewardship practice. So I want to kind of think if you're on finance committee, what's your current financial practice, what's your current stewardship practice, and you kind of see how I define those. But you as finance committee are responsible for both. When I was a local church pastor and not a ecclesiastical bureaucrat or whatever I am today, I changed the name of my finance committee. I called it the Finance and Stewardship Committee because that better defines your job. Because when it comes time to do it like a stewardship campaign, that's part of your job too, to help figure that out. How you celebrate the wins, how you think of new ways to make money, because it doesn't, making money for churches today, building the budget doesn't just have to be folks tithe. I've seen finance committees work with trustee committees, for example, to lease out part of the building, especially in some of these big downtown structures we have. I've seen them work together to work on create just real creative ways for fundraising in the larger community. You can be creative here. So your income is not only the tithes, but it's some other stuff too. And so you can work with different committees, including trustees, on some of that. You have some basic responsibilities again. And if you look in the online, again, let me just kind of paste that in one more time here. I'm going to paste that into the chat. If you look at this, I actually budgeting, admin of funds, stewardship. I have a whole slide on each of these bullet points on the downloadable ones. But just to help broaden the conversation out a little bit. For your finance committee, if you want to, you could at the first session take these full set of slides and show them and kind of walk through your job description, because with your new committee this month. Notice on this, you do some budgeting. I think of a budget not as a law set in stone, but as a flight plan. Think of a pilot. They have a flight plan. We plan to go here, we plan to go there, we plan to travel at this altitude, but storms come, right? Turbulence comes, and you can shift as needed. And so work with your church council to figure out when you need, to change the altitude a little bit based upon turbulence, or maybe you need to even change cities you're going to because something else is going on, like, I don't know, COVID or something. So budgets can be adapted, but they do give you a flight plan to move forward. You're responsible for donor intent and compliance with that. When someone writes something in the memo, that is a legal obligation if you accept their check. And so if you want to change the direction of that, you have to have a conversation. And that's part of fundraising, and these special offerings means you need to probably create a little bit of flexibility in your system on some of that, so you can deal with donor intent as needed. You notice there about income generation, we talked about that a little bit already. Reporting to the congregation is important. I will say this, I'm usually more, depending on the size of the church and the culture, I'm usually more of a proponent of sending out financial information in the newsletter or e-news rather than the weekly worship bulletin. And the reason for that on that communication is that worship bulletin that folks get, guests get that, worship guest. And worship, and I know how money works in churches, and usually you get a lot of your income in December. Well, what that means is that as a worship guest, they're coming in here, they're saying, man, there sure is a gap on their income. I wonder what's going on in this church. So they think bad things about your church before they even find out, oh, that's normal, whatever. I think of that as more family information. And so I'm not embarrassed by it, but we try to do it during more family communication methods, newsletter, e-news, stuff like that. And probably less, for financial reports and charts and all that, less than the worship bulletin. Let worship be about worship and welcoming new people. And then, of course, ensuring finance secretary and treasurer compliance with the expectations of the church. I, as a superintendent, have heard more in a few situations when, like, the treasurer said, well, I'm in charge of the finances and they're private. I'll let you know if you need to know something. Well, no, that's not appropriate. The treasurer works for the finance committee and works for the church council. They need to be ready at any moment to open up and give away those books. That we need to remember who they're accountable to. Finance secretary and treasurer are fully accountable to the finance committee at any time. They do not run the money. They oversee it as they're given delegated duties by the discipline and the committee, but they're always amenable to the committees. Let me see. We have finance membership. If you notice here, there could be some at-large folks, and also there's a list of officers like your pastor parish chair, your chair of the church council, the trustee chair. You kind of see all these chairs or designees. So it's their committee made up of a lot of different people on other committees. And then you may have some at-large folks on that as well, as the church conference determines. If you have paid employees that do some of the money counting, or you may have a treasurer who's also a paid employee. if you have a paid staff member, they probably don't need to be having a vote, even if they're a church member. Because once they're paid by the church to do a job, they're now an employee, even if they're a church member. So you don't need to double up and have that employee also have a vote. Does that make sense? That's just to keep good boundaries. Good boundaries. Now, staff parish is going to be tomorrow night. I've got a whole set of rules on staff parish. We're going to spend a whole hour on them because that's a pretty complicated gig. But I wanted you to get a feel for the different kinds of roles here. And if you notice something, some of you may be lay leaders. Notice that lay leader, they're showing up to everything. The lay leader, they're on all these committees. Why? Because they're the connective tissue and the teammate with the pastor on everything. Treasurer and financial secretary. We again have sometimes think of these in different kinds of ways. I want to suggest something for you business types you may like. And that is the financial secretary is accounts receivable and the treasurer's accounts payable. We have separation of duties. So this can't be the same person or same household. But if you think of them that way, you've separated out duties. One takes the incoming money, one writes the checks, and there's separate jobs like that. And so you have separation of duties for accounts receivable, accounts payable, financial secretary, treasurer. Does this help some of y'all who think about this? Maybe a different way of looking at it? Because we sometimes get stuck up on church language. But I think these business terms sometimes help. So these are, you see some of the basic responsibilities on each of those. The next thing I wanted to share is about internal controls. Y'all may have seen this fraud triangle. We've talked about it in previous meetings. We have sample policies on the conference website for internal controls. I'll be talking more about that in my next slide. But the idea behind this is that we've all heard of situations where money went where they didn't need to go to, including to someone's pocket that didn't need to be having it. We set up policies to this because we cannot control the pressure a person might feel. You know, money problems, health problems, whatever. The rationalization, folks, sometimes, well, you know, I work so hard, maybe I deserve a little more. We can't fix people's rationalization. We can't fix people that have pressure going on in their lives. What we can work on is opportunity. And that's that's the only thing the church can fix is opportunity. And so we have multiple people do the offering. We write things down a certain way and we turn it in to the lockbox or ever how our system goes. We can make ourselves easily financially reviewed or auditable. And you do all these internal controls. And you kind of see a list there. You know, multiple people signing things, stuff like that. I'll just put one thing simple. You do not need to have your pastor involved in touching money. I really don't want to see pastor or pastor families messing around with money. I've had people try to hand me a check, you know, for a special offering or memorial, and I'm like, whoa, no, you need to give that one to Betty. I can't take that. I can't take money. I understand, you know, I just, you know, nope, I'm not even gonna take, because as soon as I took that memorial check, I'd probably stick it in, you know, my jacket pocket at the funeral or something. And then I'd take, you know, next time I grab my suit coat for the next service, there it is. Oh, it's still in my pocket. I forgot to turn it in. I got distracted. Nope. So I don't even touch money. I'm not gonna have anyone do that. So I've never done it. I'm not going to do it. And so you can set up these rules, reimbursements, all that, so that you're not surprised and everything is happening according to a certain set of standards. And again, there is online a sample for a small church and a bigger church that you could just use, insert the church's name and move on. I also want to say as finance committee, stewardship is part of discipleship. And a budget's a spiritual document, and the finance committee needs to focus on stewardship and not scarcity. Scarcity means, oh, we don't have enough, we can't get anything done, we can't do any ministry, we got to cut. Stewardship means, well, where are some opportunities God has for us, or people that we need to talk to grow the income and grow our ability to do more ministry. It's just different ways of looking at things. And you can always have some other folks involved in the conversation and team up with the pastor, team up with other committees, ministry committees. But I think finance, you need to just keep that in your heart, that it's not just about cutting budgets or keeping everyone in line, but always be thinking of how can we have more income to do more ministry. Okay. The conference tithe. Several years ago now, we moved to a conference tithe. We used to have an apportionment system, and some people still talk about apportionments. Apportionments were based upon a very complicated formula of different income or expense lines. And even before that, like 25, 30 years ago, it used to be based on membership, and it was all this formulas. We got rid of that years ago now, over a decade ago, and we moved to the conference tithe. And the idea behind the conference tithe is we use it based on income. We have a few exceptions, like capital campaigns or pass-through money. If your people give money to support a tornado, we don't cut from that. It's pass-through. But other than that, we have this 10%. 10% of contributions are given to the conference. And the conference, by the way, passes on a big chunk of that to the general church and some of there's pension programs, stuff like that. It's not like every bit of it's used for different ministries. It's used for different things, both around the world and in Arkansas. And so there's a remittance form for this, and the treasurer, you can do it online, you can do it on paper, should be doing that on a monthly basis. So you just take that income, do 10%, and it's real simple. Just run that 10% calculation and submit it every month, and don't get behind. And our conference year runs from July 1st through June 30th. And my suggestion is just try to stay current as you get through that conference year. So that's the tithe. And again, I'll be answering questions on some of that. Again, these are some documents you can use. I've included this one, the Church Financial Record Handbook. You can use some digital stuff, sure, but this is a little tool handbook with photocopiable documents that you can use to record stuff. It also has samples of, here's a reimbursement form and stuff like that you can use in your church, so you don't feel like you have to make up everything yourself. And again, our conference website has a bunch of information on it. Okay, Q&A time. I'm going to close out this share and open it up to the group again. And I encourage you to ask any questions. And I see I got it done before the ball game. So I think I'm surprising more than one Methodist here that I was able to accomplish that. Okay. But seriously, friends, what you got for me in the way of questions? Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to close out the recording,